Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're diving into a story of tradition, exploration, and self-reliance. These are the core themes of the Race to Alaska, a groundbreaking human and wind-powered journey through North America's Inside Passage. With no engines, no support crews, no supply drops, and barely any rules, it's a race that pushes competitors to their limits, fueled by pure grit and determination. Our guest today is Zach Carver, the brilliant writer and director of the award-winning documentary Race to Alaska. Over 7 years, Zach captured more than 70,000 shots to craft an epic tale of adventure and resilience. But his filmmaking wasn't just behind the camera. Zach became part of the story, immersing himself in the spirit of this remarkable race. I can't wait for you to hear about the Race to Alaska, the making of this incredible film, and the unforgettable moments that Zach experienced along the way. Zach, welcome to the campfire.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I am so excited. So I guess I'll just start by saying the Race to Alaska is available. I believe I watched it on Amazon. So people need to run out there and watch this movie. It is such a good movie. It's such a great story. You did such a fantastic job with this.
Thank you.
I thought my hope is that the takeaway that people get from this episode is they'll go watch the movie. But Zach, let's just jump right in. What is, for those that haven't seen the movie, what is the Race to Alaska?
The Race to Alaska is about the eponymous boat race. So it's an adventure boat race, theoretically dreamed up over beers. The creators called it the best bad idea they'd ever had. It's very simple. There's a start in Port Townsend, Washington, and a finish line in Ketchikan, Alaska, and a $10,000 prize for first place. Second place gets a set of steak knives, and pretty much any boat is eligible as long as there's no motor on board the boat.
Any boat, no motor. I love it.
Yeah. So it's 750 miles. It's cold water, very cold water, and a lot of it's open to the Pacific, and it's just a gnarly adventure.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the route the race takes?
It basically goes up the Inside Passage, which is inside because it's protected by a bunch of island groups along the west coast of Canada. It's a really common route for mariners, cruise ships take it, etc. But it's still pretty vast in a small boat. And then there's multiple places that are open to the Pacific. So the first stage is a proving ground, they call it. It's from Port Townsend to Victoria, BC. And that goes across the Straits of Juan de Fuca, which is about 35 miles open to the Pacific in the west. And that's kind of the entrance to Seattle and the Port of Seattle. That can be huge water, frankly, but it's also really close to home. So if they can make it across there, they have 36 hours to do it. 48 hours to do it, something like that. They have a short window. Then they go through customs in Victoria, and then from there, it's nonstop to Ketchikan. On the way, they have to go through two waypoints. One is Campbell River, a place called Seymour Narrows, which is a tidal rapids. Basically, there's so many islands up there, and the water has to get around Vancouver Island, which is one of the biggest, I think the biggest island in North America. Right. So the tide has to rush through these narrow passages in the islands. And so there's a few different narrows that you're required to go through if you wanted to go inside. And Seymour is one of them. The currents can be up to 15 knots, like 16, 17 miles an hour at peak flow in either direction. So anyway, they got to go through there. Then they get to the north end of Vancouver Island. They go around a place called Cape Caution or the Queen Charlotte Sound, Queen Charlotte Strait. That's also open to the Pacific. Then they keep headed north through the town of Bella Bella, which is the second waypoint. And then from there, they take whatever course they want up to Ketchikan. So it's a vast race course.
Yeah. I mean, let's just jump right. We're going to maybe touch on this a little bit later, but as we're talking about the location, can you talk about some of just sort of the natural experience of going through that and some of the beauty that you see going through the Inside Passage that people, if they're not familiar?
Oh, I mean, it's one of the most beautiful waterways on the planet. It's like if you've seen Lord of the Rings, it's sort of like sailing through Mordor in certain way, like mountains on either side of you. Vancouver Island has a coastal mountain range that's often snow-capped. And then inland, there's all these fjords that head into the west coast of Canada. So it's glacially formed, huge forests. It's just like literally a mountain coming out of the water. There's places where it goes straight down, like 10 feet off the beach, you're in 100 feet of water. And so that same trajectory goes up and down. So like trees are just sort of hanging on, and a lot of wildlife. You'll see orcas and minke whales and Dall's porpoise. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Yeah. So probably a little less than 20 years ago, my wife and I did a cruise from Seattle to Alaska. And I think on the way back, we went through the Inside Passage. And it's funny, like cruise ships go through there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, it's just fun. Like for me, like I remember the vivid beauty, like the blue of the water, and then, the green backdrop of, the conifer trees and the mountains. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. But I guess what's kind of funny, cruise ships can just go through there, right? And I can sit on the cruise deck and look out and be super comfortable. Like this is a very different experience for the people that are participating in this.
Yeah. Engines is a big factor. The most unique thing about it as a waterway and for this race in general is the current that runs through there. It's something that so basically like when Jake Beatty, who started this race, he called me up and he's like, hey, I need to make a video to promote this idea. I need to make a starting line. I was like, all right, we can do that. And he's like, he outlines what the race is. And my first thought is like, oh my God, that's so hard. That's incredible. That's such an incredible challenge. Cause I've grown up in the Pacific Northwest. I understand that. And to me, it's the current that a lot of people from other places don't quite understand, that even in the more wide open places that aren't a narrows, the current's often running 3 knots in either direction. And I don't know if you've ever paddled a kayak or rowed a boat, you're going about 3 knots. So once the current is against you, you're making possibly zero progress, or you're looking for back eddies or other ways to get around it. And so understanding that without having a motor in places that are, when it's 100 feet deep, 10 feet from the shore, anchoring can be almost impossible. There's nowhere to stop. So if the weather's inclement or you're moving backwards because of the current, just moving backwards. So that part is huge. And also the wind against the current creates a short, steep sea state, these like short, steep waves that are kind of brutal and can, even if they're not the tallest waves in the world, the period is so short that they just like rattle your teeth out. Anyway, it can be quite a place to be in a small boat.
So I'm just like envisioning this, like you said, the current could be 15 knots.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there a potential that you're like going backwards? I mean, at some point, does it make sense to stop and wait for the tide so you're not fighting
definitely,
that?
especially in the smaller boats. So the racers, the people that invented the race they're from outward bound backgrounds, and
Cool.
they did a lot of adventuring in what's called a longboat, which is they're wooden replicas of the Discovery launch and the Captain Vancouver, like all the colonial exploration. They would have big ships and they drop these 25, 30 foot wooden launches, and they would go explore the smaller waterways. They would do soundings. They would try to find out like what's out there. And so Outward Bound did all these programs where you take a dozen kids on one of these and adventure. And so it's interesting, their perception of who was going to join the race was like these more kind of row sail, small boat, crusty people. And those people definitely showed up, and that's awesome. But there's this other element where people are like, oh, the way to do this is in a carbon fiber trimaran and go very fast and sail 90% of the time. And so that's what happened. So yeah, you can definitely end up going backwards. If you don't have fast sailing, you're typically going to be anchoring or trying to just hold station until the current turns around. Seymour Narrows is a place where most people wait for the tide change. And because it's moving north and south and it switches, there's slack water period that's about a half an hour where it's just sort of bubbling and changing directions. And so that's when you want to go through. When I've ever gone up on a power boat, we always wait for slack water and then go through at that moment. One of the crazy things that happened in the race to Alaska is people are like advised never sail through there. Very dangerous. Don't sail through there unless it's slack. Even then it's slack, you're supposed to motor. What the racers realize is if they're carried with the current, their boat actually creates apparent wind. So the act of the current pushing the sailboats through the water creates wind in the sails because they're just being pushed along. And they could use that wind to create steerage.
Oh,
So
wow.
this new thing happened with some of the high performance boats where we saw them not stop and wait, but actually go with the flood tide and be tacking, like the current's just pushing them along and they're just tacking with the sometimes non-existent wind.
With their own wind. That's amazing.
With their own wind is really cool to see.
That's amazing. So cool. Well, and this podcast is a big fan of Outward Bound. So definite shout out to them as well. That's awesome. So I think you touched on the rules a little bit. There really aren't very many, right? Just no engine. What are some of the other rules?
I mean, no engine, no outside support. So you're allowed to take advantage of anything available to all people. So like if there's a store, you can go to the store and buy some food or buy some supplies. But if you go to a really remote section of the race course a week before the race starts and leave a duffel bag of supplies, that disqualifies you. That means you or somebody else runs down and supports you in a way that's not available to all other racers. They really push the idea of self-reliance. It's actually very much the Outward Bound background of kind of like the solo, like creating the widest parameters possible for people to have a relatively safe personal adventure, or maybe not safe, but to something that tests their limits. So what are the other rules? There is no motors allowed on the boat, not even like you just can't have it on board, even if it wouldn't be possibly functional. Your sail or row or human power, however you want. There's no size restriction on the boat. They have something called Rule 8, which is basically if you challenge the rules or if they need to get a lawyer involved, you're out of the race. So don't mess with it. It's in direct contrast to sailboat racing as it stood at the beginning of the race to Alaska, because there's so many, like a lot of times you finish a sailboat race, but somebody has a protest and you have to go to the committee and then they have to talk about it. And then like, oh, this person actually was ahead and then they weren't. And like the other thing in sailboat racing that's very confusing, or like a lot of people don't love, is there's this thing called corrected time. One of the ways, I don't know how much your audience knows about sailboat racing, but one of the ways a bunch of different types of boats can race against each other is they make a table of how fast a boat should be over a given distance. So if you have a little dinghy, it's only going to go in an hour, it's going to go 6 miles. And if you have a big fast trimaran, in an hour, it's going to go 20 miles. And so they take this, they create a rating. And so you multiply your time by this rating to try to even out the fleet. So you're not actually racing directly against the other boats. You're racing against a theoretical time,
right? And
then calculated later. So you can be, I've finished races and waited an hour for somebody else to finish to find out they beat me. And it's just an odd thing. And so, So the Race to Alaska, the founders were like, we don't like this. We want to do something clean, that's fairly unfair, that is uniformly unfair. And that's where they came up with this wide rule. So it's just the waypoints. You have to go through those waypoints and check in. You have to have your tracker on. There's a tracker on all the boats. You have to have your spot tracker on. That's very important. And there's not much else. It's really open.
Hey everyone, it's Scott here. Did you know that the members of my real estate team, W Realty Group, are listening to their own voices that call to adventure by setting big goals? Some of those goals include planning trips to Bali and the Kingdom of Bhutan, buying investment homes, and running the Chicago Marathon. At W Realty Group, we support and encourage these big goals and want to help turn them into reality. We're currently looking to add new members to the team. If you know a great real estate agent in the Charlotte, North Carolina area that would benefit from being part of our team, please send a text, an email, or give me a call. And know that when you support W Realty Group, you're also supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening. There's like, I don't know why this word's coming to me, but like, seems like there's like a scrappiness to this. It's like, let's just go do this thing. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's the spirit of it for sure. And, as it grew, the first year Jake thought a dozen people would show up, but they ended up with like 30 or 40 entrants, and it blew up really fast because there was a want for this in the world. But yeah, very scrappy.
So no engine. I mean, that's basically it, right? Like in terms of the boat that you can use. So what types of boats show up for this race?
Oh, all types. I mean, the sort of most extreme austere boat would be a stand-up paddleboard. There's been one person to finish on a stand-up paddleboard. A couple other people have tried.
It's 710 miles, yeah?
750 total miles. Yeah.
750 miles on a stand-up paddleboard.
Yeah. And he actually is faster than a ton of people. His name's Carl Kruger. He's an incredible athlete. Currently, he's doing this project where when he finished Race to Alaska, he was like, I don't really want to stop. So he decided to try to do the Northwest Passage, which is, the north coast of Canada. And so he goes up and he realized he couldn't make it all in one melt period, but he's doing it in stages. So now he's got his polar bear shotgun on there and he's paddling across the Arctic. But it was really fun to watch him, and he's very inspiring to a lot of people. But yeah, so there's stand-up paddleboards, there's kayaks. There's been multiple people in double and single kayaks. There's been rowboats, and then a lot of sort of small to medium-sized sailboats, like just kind of typical production, Santana 20, that kind of thing, or like all kinds of production sailboats. Then there's racier boats, or like racier sail, like Melges 24, Santa Cruz 27, etc. Then trimarans got really popular because of they're very lightweight and they have low resistance. So the Corsair trimarans have done really well. And then on the world records from a Marstrom 32, which is a carbon fiber giant beach cat, basically. It's kind of like a giant Hobie cat, that Team Mad Dog Racing. And so they were amazing. They didn't sleep for more than 45 minutes at a time over 4 days. Because the crew weight is vital whenever they tack. They had to wake up, switch sides, go back to bed. Like they were, that was a brutal campaign, but they got the glory. And then there's been like large monohull race boats up to like 40 feet, like I can't remember, Shock 40 one year, and some other things like that, 40, 45 feet.
Does the boat, I mean, this might seem like a stupid question here, but it seems like it's more like will, grit, and determination that gets you through this over the boat. Does the boat seem to have an impact on who wins?
I mean, hugely, there's a quote in the movie that Jake was like, well, fast boats are faster is the dumb thing we learned in this race, he says. Because they, part of the experiment of it was because of the conditions, it's very variable. The race happens in the middle of June, and June, the wind can be non-existent. You get a high pressure that just sits on hundreds of miles of that coastline where there's just almost no wind for 3 days. And, we thought, oh man, a rowboat or like a fast human power boat could really get ahead at that point. It turns out that if you have a fast sailboat, you make up so much ground in the 1 day of wind that didn't really pan out.
Got it.
So the boat choice is huge, but there's all these factors. It's one of the, like anything, if you pick the high tweak, they call them high tweak for whatever reason. But like boats that require, that are super fast and fine and light, and you've minimized the materials, like the hull is paper thin carbon fiber, etc. That boat has a ton of speed, but there's a big lumber industry up here. So there's a lot of stray logs in the water. And when you're going 20 knots and you have a carbon fiber hull, it's really easy to crack that hull or break your rudder off. And they race, you race through the night. And so like there's a boat, the boat's called Dragon. I can't remember what their team name is, but they won 1 or 2 years ago, and he bought this boat from New Zealand. It's very fancy, fast trimaran. I think really sleek. I mean, it looks incredible. It's an incredible looking boat. But he tried 3 times to win. He was out for breakages or other issues. Like so though he had probably the empirically fastest boat, he was still he took him 3 tries, which I think is a lot of respect for that race course.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about the boats. Who are the people behind the teams, and why do they show up for this race?
That's what the movie's about, right? Like the people are incredible. I think they show up to find something in themselves. I think everyone I talked to, like overwhelmingly, had found something they didn't know was there, but like we're looking for, or we're hoping to find. They found some edge. Even people that did it in a much more casual sense, it's still grueling and hard. Like people will be in tears at the finish line. People will be just overwhelmed with feeling, because no matter what, this thing's hard. Like we've talked about having, like, I'm sure you've talked about this in other adventure things. Like there's a chafe point. There's always going to be something that chafes. And is it going to be your personality? Is it going to be your you just like you're just cold, you just stay cold for too long?
Yeah.
Is it going to be physical blisters or something? Is it going to be like, will, I don't know, it just attracts people with a lot of, weirdly, a ton of humor and a lot of grit.
Yeah. All of that shines through so well in the movie, like absolutely. And you said that's what the movie's about. So we won't go too deep into the individual stories because people can get that from the movie, but all the humor, the grit, like all of that, it comes across so well in the movie. So let's talk about your involvement for listeners. You wrote and directed this movie. How did you get involved, and like what does that mean to write and direct this movie? Because it's bigger than just sitting down at a desk and writing a story.
I got involved because I used to work for Jake Beatty, the founder at the Center for Wooden Boats. But yeah, I worked there like 2005, 2006, and I was or seven, somewhere in there, 6 and 7. And I ran the livery, which is like the small boat rental fleet, and taught sailing and maritime history. And Jake was my boss. And then he went on to run the Northwest Maritime Center, and I went to film school. And then after film school, we reconvened, and he was like, hey, I've got this race idea. So I made their very first promo for the race to Alaska. And then they were like, man, we should document this thing since it's never before been done. And they were like, hey, do you want to come film it? We have a few dollars. And like, so I went up and filmed it, and it was incredible. It was just me and one other person on the crew really the first year. And she was only there for a short time. But then they anointed me the film boss. They called everyone a boss for like, they had this whole idea of unfairness. And so I got the title of film boss, and basically that meant I was documenting the race. So that first year I thought, I want to make a movie about it because I just finished film school. I'm thinking in cinematic terms. So I interviewed every single racer before the race started. I made sure to get a pre-interview with every single team, and I was kind of building this whole thing in my head. And I ended up, we had this volunteer pilot that was like, hey, does the film guy want to fly around with me? So I ended up flying around in this little light plane with the door off, shooting out the side. And I had the totally wrong gear for that. Anyway, it was really trial by fire, but in the end, we didn't make a movie because there wasn't really support, and there wasn't an outstanding story. And also the very first winner lost their GoPro over the back of the boat, had zero footage. So,
No.
if nothing, we thought, we'll make a movie about the winner, but they had nothing. So, which is why they don't, I'm sorry, Team Elsie Pittock, it's why they don't appear as much in the film as we'd like to, because we didn't have any supporting footage. And I did a bunch of exit interviews. Anyway, I tried to build it as a film, then it got shelved for several years, but I kept coming back to make the promo stuff and the daily content for the race. So my team would go make, we called it the clip of the day, and it was like a 24-hour turnaround mini documentary. And it was about as, I don't think as grueling as the race, but it was pretty full on. Like editing out in the middle of nowhere. We were in Bella Bella, and like the upload speeds were super slow. So we'd like be out on a dock in the middle of the night trying to find the best Wi-Fi to upload this thing that they could bring it down and the marketing team could get it out to people. That got better and better as the year, like now would they have Starlink on the team, and it's a lot easier, but it was fun. It was super fun and very exciting to chase this race. But yeah, so I filmed it for them. And then we got one of my team members, Luke Gardner, told me about a film called the Barkley Marathons, The Race That Eats Its Young. Incredible movie. I think your listeners would love it. About this marathon in Tennessee, ultra marathon, and these like very quirky people that both run it and participate. And I watched that film, realized that the structure was that the race itself is the protagonist, and that the racers, kind of illustrate this so you don't need one specific story. And I was like, I see. The race is the protagonist. And once I saw that, I was like, we can make a movie. Sorry, that was a long-winded response to how I got into it.
It's so helpful. In fact, I actually, because you told me about the Barclays Marathon, and I watched the trailer for The Race That Eats Its Young last night. It's on my list for sure. It looks so good.
It's really fun. Yeah. It starts like a little slow, but it's wonderful.
Yeah.
They did a great job. And we actually called them when we were considering like putting the movie together, and the producers were really generous and talked to us for a while. And and then from there it was like, how do you create this? Because we had years and years of footage. We had we had a ton of hard drives. How do you make sense of all of that? And like, a lot of people ask, I think I told you in the phone call, a lot of people ask like, what's the hardest thing and they're kind of expecting like, oh yeah, hanging off a boat with a camera and the rain and the cold, which was fun, but also hard. But the hardest thing was structure, figuring out how to structure this mountain of material. And so learning that the race was the protagonist. And then we realized through a bunch of trial and error with my editor, Greg King, who's also a co-writer, he's an incredible creative talent, that we had to make the race course the organizing principle. And so then we could, so I had this whole puzzle where it was like, I want to tell this story. So we had a hero's journey mapped out.
Yeah.
And then we had the race course mapped out. And then we had necessary information mapped out on like a huge butcher paper timeline. And I kept moving things around. So it'd be like, oh, I have this great story from this team. And it's a really, really good story, but it illustrates, the like leaving of the Shire kind of moment.
Yeah.
So we're going to put that early on in the movie. Oh, but the problem is it's late in the race course. So we can't use that one anymore. We have to use a different story because you have to find the hero's journey that matches the kind of linear progression of the race course. And then the other organizing principle was who filmed themselves. And one of the nice things about that is a lot of the entertaining people had the impetus to film themselves. If people think it's funny and they're going to have fun with the camera, they're likely to turn on the camera. So I do think some people that are really entertaining and wonderful didn't, but it was cool. My editor was like, well, this is your closest to the action footage. So he's like, we're going to take this stuff and that's our A camera. And then we'll move from there. It was really great.
So cool. We do talk about the hero's journey quite a bit on this podcast. And I think that's such an interesting thing. So what I'm hearing you say is like, you kind of mapped out the hero's journey and then you had to like find pieces of footage and material that you had to plug into that to create the monster storyline. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. So you're like in the movie, there's what's a good example, or just even quotes from the interviews, like Team Sail Like a Girl. She talks about what it's like. She has this moment where she's like, you start to think, she's like a mother and she's doing this kind of crazy thing. She's like, the night before, you're just thinking, you're like, we were excited. Oh, this is crazy. I can't believe I'm doing this. And then you're like, this is crazy. Should I be doing this? And so like that quote needed to live there. Or I'm trying to think of other vignettes that make sense. I don't know. We just tried to find little fun moments, either funny moments or important moments that we could put in linear order on the race course that made sense. Like, have like midpoint stuff happen near Bella Bella with people, Carl Kruger talking about like finding the strength to go on. We have other people talking about, the really difficult, hard moments. And we converge that at the midpoint in Bella Bella, which would be sort of like, the darkest before the dawn moment in your film. Before you figure out the way out, you have to go through the dark bit, in the hero's journey. So
yeah, totally. I love that. So like, if I was to ask you to kind of describe maybe a little teaser of what people are going to get when they watch that movie, whether it's like an example of something that happens, like what can people expect when they watch this movie?
They can expect surprisingly funny moments, pretty fast pace, a lot of fun music. Our composer, Spencer, did fantastic music. You can expect to see stories of people finding their edge in various ways, whether it's like, I don't know, reconciling that they're going to do it very, very slow and have a good time, or whether it's like sailing at night as fast as they possibly can with zero visibility, listening to the hum of the hulls and the sounds, wondering if the rigging is going to stay, climbing the mast in a gale, I don't know, fixing things that are broken, and also like understanding the poetry of this place, because the race course itself, I think being from there, I love this area. Like I'm just totally enamored with the Pacific Northwest, specifically the Inside Passage. Like it was my dream as a kid. I read all these sailing books. I wanted to go up there. And so there's really like an ode to the place in this film. So you're going to get as much beauty as we could capture, and people kind of having their moments with that beauty.
For sure. How about emotion? What emotions people are going to witness when they're watching the movie?
I mean, they're gonna see people scared. They're gonna see people elated. They're gonna see people frustrated. They're gonna see people laughing. There's a lot of gallows humor. Like it's the kind of thing that I'm sure you're familiar with type 2 fun. A lot of people talk about
Yeah.
the race as type 2 fun.
Yeah.
So there's people that have to have a sense of humor towards the difficulties they're enduring. You're going to see a lot of ingenuity. That's actually something you asked earlier about who does this race. It's people with like a sense of ingenuity and creativity. One of the big tasks in this is how do you human power boats that were never meant to human power? And that created all these cool pedal drives and different systems and adding rowing rigs to trimarans and stuff. And so it's like people that get a kick out of that are going to show up for this race. And so they're also going to have ingenious ways to solve problems. And yeah, I don't know. I think you're going to, that's what I got emotionally. But
I love it.
It takes you through a lot.
I love it. So I think one of the things I want to acknowledge with you specifically and your involvement in this is a few things. You mentioned that the Pacific Northwest is just your favorite place. You've been around boats. We didn't get into this too much, although I did talk to you about it previously before we recorded today, but you've been around boats pretty much your whole life.
Yeah.
You know, it's been kind of a passion for you. And then you go away to film school. And then you come back and now all of a sudden, like all of these things come together in this opportunity to do this amazing adventure and film it and create a documentary. It's like, it's almost like, I don't know. It's pretty amazing that these things that are all passions of yours all kind of integrate into this one point. And like, you know, you're the perfect person to do this. I don't know. There's like, this whole podcast is about listening to the voice inside that calls us to adventure. And when those, like when your passions merge like that, I just think that's such an amazing thing. What's that like for you?
I mean, it was amazing. It was really, really cool. It felt very good to be doing something that I felt like, oh, I'm uniquely cut out for. And like, yeah, like you said, that calling, it's like, oh, I can navigate, I can sail, I can drive the boat, I can understand what's going on. And now I have all this narrative training that helps me make sense of that and tell good stories about it. It was really cool. I mean, I think also the call to adventure part is really interesting. After grad school, it can be a little hard to find your footing. I was a very long program, sort of out of the working world and stuff for a few years. And it's just, I was at a fortunate place to not have a lot going on when they called me to film the first race. And I was able to like, I didn't even have an apartment. I was subletting in LA, trying to maybe move here, maybe not. And they were like, "You want to come do this thing?" I was like, "Sure, I'll just leave." And I can afford to do this thing. But it was a unique moment in my life that I was able to do that, which was really cool to say yes to the adventure and then to keep doing it over and over. I don't know. It was very exciting. It was always super fun. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what else to say other than I feel pretty lucky.
It's amazing. So the thing is that, you know, this race goes on and there's these participants. And I mean, to me, what I'm seeing is like, yes, you probably had to be in a boat with an engine to get around. But I mean, aside from that, like you're experiencing this race alongside of everybody else. So I'm just curious, like from your perspective, what was the experience of the race like for you?
I mean, the first year was truly incredible because it was this 750-mile experiment and nobody knew what was going to happen. No one knew who was going to win. And I was like reporting the news from the front lines, you know, and like there was a moment when I was flying with Nick Reed, the pilot I mentioned, in his little yellow plane. And the leaders, Elsie Pittock, had gone through Seymour Narrows already. And we were flying to try to catch him. And like we flew way further than we thought we were going to fly. And he's like checking his fuel gauges. And I mean, we weren't in danger, but he's like, I don't know how far we should chase them, like basically. And they had just had this huge commanding lead. And we realized like he's an aerial photographer, but we went to get the photo and go back and report what happened. We realized we're like the only people that know what's going on. You know, we're in the sky looking down on this team, seeing them pound through Johnstone Strait, like just going so fast. And like, we had this, it was just very special to be like flying in this very remote place going, oh, we're the only ones. Like, this is very cool. And then how, like, we did a lot of, that was exciting too, because he would fly at a steady decline to get as close as possible. And then he'd be like, hold the stick, don't pull up, and take photos out the window. And so that was like, that was a nice adventure moment where you're like, okay, we're getting, the water's close. but he's great. I trust him 110% to fly. But yeah, so stuff like that was pretty magical, and like the sense of adventure and like following the race. Like I get I love this stuff. If I had been in Seattle, in my 20s when the race started, I would have raced. I would have been in it, and so watching and wondering what's going to happen, and like calculating like, oh, well, the current's going to switch, so I think they're going to get screwed and this other team's going to get ahead. And like me and Daniel Evans, the race boss, became quite good friends. And, he's been a schooner captain and an outward bound instructor and a small ship captain all up and down. He's from Alaska. So he's been all over that waterway. So we're just looking at the chart and we're like, oh man, this is going to happen. Like, there's so much excitement. And Jake, just not knowing what was going to happen, we had to fly, like everyone had to change their flights to Ketchikan that first year because no one thought anyone would go that fast. They brought 2 days faster than anyone anticipated from doing the math. And so it was just like this mad dash to stay ahead of them, So it was very exciting. And subsequent years too, still fun.
It's crazy. Like, I mean, again, as you being part of the adventure, I mean, for the participants, like they have a singular goal to like get through the inside passage and get to the waypoints and get to the finish line. Like you kind of have that same objective too, but then you also have like work that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're shooting footage, you're putting a story together. Like, were you able to like just kind of stop and enjoy the adventure for the adventure that it was? Or were you so focused on the work that it was hard to?
I mean, you get both. There's long days and there's really fun days. Like sometimes the pressure points are actually the time you do look around. Like I remember one day we had this awesome power catamaran that Fisheries Supply lent us, named Disco. And I can't remember where we were going, but I had an editor like cranking away in the city. We're going 25 knots, trying to get to the next place to beat a boat. And then my photographer, who's just gotten to Bella Bella and just like come back into range, she's photo and video, leave. She's like, hey, I have a problem with my lens. I need a filter. I need this other thing. So I'm like calling float plane, like freight services and calling camera shops in Vancouver and like mobilizing the volunteer network to be like, okay, guys, can we get someone to go to this camera shop, to go to this seaplane place, to fly air freight to this woman in Bella Bella while I'm also like working with the editor and we're trying to navigate. And like it was beautiful. It was a beautiful day. It was very exciting. It was really fun. And then other like more tranquil moments. I got to the year Mad Dog Racing won, and it set the world record. No one's beat it since. It's like 3 days and 19 hours or something.
Yeah. Wow.
We were driving this big donated 60-foot like expedition yacht, and we were following them as sun was going down. We're going out into I think Polier Pass into the Straits of Georgia, and Daniel's starting to do some math on their course, the wind, and we were planning to anchor that night and then catch up with other teams. We start talking and realizing there's no way we'll catch them. If we don't follow them now, we'll never catch them. So we just make the decision on the fly to just turn and head north and keep motoring all night. And so I like slept on the deck with stars, like. So there's this incredible adventure moments that were peppered into this stress and racing around. And, there's a lot of hard decisions of like, who do we follow? How do we get the story? What do we edit? Like how, if we're trying to get things turned around fast, but
yeah,
some very special moments.
So cool. Zach, you mentioned when we spoke before that the Race to Alaska is actually a community. And you made the comment that it's something that you didn't realize you needed until you became part of it. I just wondered if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
I think a lot of the racers said that too, that we're like, this is a community we didn't know existed and didn't know we needed. I think it's just a really unique Venn diagram of people and talents. It's people that have the interest, passion, and skills to try to do this race. They love sailing, they love the outdoors, they love boats. And then they also have the like humor and fortitude to get through it. And so I think the general, I don't know, that kind of like pluck, whimsy, scrappiness, etc., brought a really interesting confluence of people together, and like some really cool, people at different ages. Like Ernie Baird he did it for his 70th birthday on this old wooden boat. He's in the film, and like it's such a treat to know Ernie Baird, and he's someone I don't think I would have met any other way. well, maybe not because I'm a wooden boat nerd, but still like he's a retired boat builder that does tango and does this race. He's so cool, and then there's like, I think that the community is really strong. And then there was a lot of community around helping each other, like 1 year, this team from France really wanted to do the race. They started to reach out like, hey, we want to do this. How do we get a boat? What can we do? And so this guy, Daniel Joram, he's not a racer. He's just around the community. He helped them buy a boat in Oregon, trailer it up as a Santana 20, trailer it up to Washington, like get it registered, like out, he was doing fabrication, outfitting. People are sending them oars and sending them equipment. And, it was just really cool to see. And also amazing that they would show up from France, sight unseen, the boat they never sailed, and then do this adventure. So
it's amazing. I love this so much. This is such a great story. People have to watch this movie. So it's available on Amazon. They can also check out details on the Race to Alaska website.
Yeah, we have the Race to Alaska movie, or r2akthemovie.com.
r2ak.com and r2akthemovie.com. Great.
Yeah, and then r2ak, the actual race. It's streaming on like a lot of different places.
And it's so good. Like you will thank us for watching this movie. It's so good. So on the website, R2AK, I was like researching, just kind of getting ready for today, just thinking about what kinds of things that I wanted to ask. And I came across the frequently asked questions. And it's fun. Like the website, I think, gives a flavor for what they're going to experience with the movie and with the experience. Like there's like, it's just fun. Like the humor comes out, the grittiness, but also just the lighthearted, fun, almost kind of snarky nature. Like it's cool. But one of the frequently asked questions it's kind of like somebody that says, this sounds like a really fun experience, but I have a full-time job and I don't know if I could take off work, or I don't think I can afford it. Mm-hmm. And the response is something like, we're glad you asked that question. And then it goes on to give a quote from Sterling Hayden's book, The Wanderer. And I'd love to just read the first paragraph of that quote. I won't do the whole thing. People can go on, but I want to ask you about this because I think it touches on the essence of the race, but also so much of what we like to talk about here on this podcast. And so from Sterling Hayden, The Wanderer, he says, to be truly challenging, a voyage like life must rest on a firm foundation of financial unrest. Otherwise, you're doomed to a routine traverse, the kind known to yachtsmen who play with their boats at sea. Cruising, it is called. Voyaging belongs to seamen and to the wanderers of the world who cannot or will not fit in. If you are contemplating a voyage and you have the means, abandon the venture until your fortune changes. Only then will you know what the sea is all about. It's so good. It gives me chills to read that. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and how it relates to this race.
I think there's a lot of people that felt that they had to do it. And, one of my favorite teams that's in the film is Team Vantucky. And they're just like carpenters that live in Vancouver, Washington. And, they were just like, we're just working guys that like to do really fun things. And they just sort of felt compelled. And they took they took the weeks off. They bought this Windrider trimaran, this little 17-foot plastic trimaran that's like, it's a gnarly boat to do that in. And they had such a great attitude about it. But like there was something, they did seem sort of like, we just got to do this thing. Like a lot of people feel compelled, and that, it cost them some money, but it's not the same as, I don't know, doing it like race to win. But there's the whole dirtbag sailors is the whole thing, and they actually give a dirtbag award for the kind of scrappiest team. It's a bag of dirt is the award. But the attitude is really there of just like, no, go out and do this thing, and you really can. Like part of their way they vet people is to see if they're like, do you have the skills to probably make it and the intelligence to stop if you need to. And with that, like judgment and intelligence, like this kind of adventure is available to you in all kinds of boats and all kinds of means, So like, just go out and do it. And like, I think that the movie too is a little bit that way. We were just like, we're gonna make a movie. Like we'll find some money somewhere, and we did. We found some investors, and they people pitched in to help, and like we didn't wait to have everything perfect. And I think that's important.
I love it. Tell me about this piece. So again, just coming back to it's the second to last sentence. If you're contemplating a voyage and you have the means, abandon the venture until your fortune changes.
That's hilarious. I don't know. I mean, I think that it becomes a test if you let it be a test. Like, otherwise he's right. You're just cruising, and cruising is awesome. I totally love cruising and condone it and recommend it. But like, I had this interesting realization recently. I was having some challenges with like some of the more office-y type work I have to do.
Yeah.
And realize I have a lot of like fear and anxiety towards that kind of work. But where I don't have fear and anxiety is on the water. Like, I'm pretty comfortable driving a boat in pretty gnarly conditions and various other things, but that's weird because that is a much less safe and more challenging place. And what I realized is like, it's because my parents pushed me out in a sailboat in a lagoon when I was 6-7 years old. And like a lagoon it might only be 100 yards wide, but like, you gotta figure it out. Right. And so from a very young age, I had this ability to be alone on boats, and like, and a wide leash. And I would like, I was very fortunate to have like supportive parents that sent me out on sailboats. I did sailing camp, but I had a little laser on the Lake Washington, but Lake Washington is 30 miles long and a few miles wide. So, it gets windy, it gets too much. You got to figure it out. You got to get home, or you got to duck in behind something and wait for the conditions to change or make those judgment calls. So when you have to be self-reliant, you will be self-reliant. And if you don't have to be, you're not going to be. It's much easier not to be. So like, I think that's the idea, is like, you won't find that thing within yourself. If you do it with means, you'll find it somewhere else.
I think you might have just answered my next question, which is essentially like, aside from watching the movie, which listeners must go do, what other advice do you have for people that have listened to this episode and are inspired by your story, whether it's the race to Alaska or this idea of combining your skills to do this thing that you're called to do? Any advice you want to leave people with? Don't be afraid to stoke the fire of your interest, whatever weird interest it is. Like when I worked at the Center for Wooden Boats, I didn't even know people had, I didn't think people had jobs there. I just loved that place. And a job happened to be posted on Craigslist when I was looking for a job, and I was 24. And like, I loved it. And like, all of my reading about, like, I used to read boat designers books and like I have a whole nerdy sense of that. But that got me this weird job and got me access to this great community. And like, I feel that it's really easy to let social pressures, society, school, parents, whatever, tell you to like, those things aren't important. Yeah. But actually, those things will lead you to places where you can thrive. And there's no substitute for that kind of interest or curiosity. And that curiosity will lead you to adventures. Yeah. And did you see this coming when you were like, as a kid on boats? No, I mean, I guess I saw a little bit when I was in high school. I wanted to be like an adventure journalist. Like, I thought I would go, take pictures and write stories. And this is a version of that. But no, I didn't really see it coming. I didn't think that I would combine those things. I also didn't know that I would go make movies. So what are you working on now, or what's coming next for you? Right now, I'm one of the story producers, associate producer on a docu-series about Sail GP, which is like the F1 of sailing. So that's a cool thing. Sweet. And then I'm not sure when that's going to come out or how that'll look, but it's a cool thing. Sail GP is worth checking out. And then we have a couple other doc projects, some travel shows. Leave, one of the camera people and one of the producers of the film, she's got like a motorcycle show we might do. And I don't know. We're working on a bunch of stuff, and I'm also trying to do more personal, like photo, video projects that are a little less, that are more kind of exploratory. So we'll see. Very cool. You're also working on something with my good friend, Karen Dark. Oh yeah. We have an amazing podcast. I'm sorry. That's yes, you guys should listen to the Alchemy Pod. It's Karen Dark is the host. She's a para athlete, Paralympian. She's climbed El Cap, I think. She has.
without the use of her legs or lower body. She's also paddled the inside passage to Alaska and skied across Antarctica. And she interviews people. The reason it's called alchemy is finding the gold in whatever difficult circumstances that you find yourself in. And they're very inspiring stories. We have one crossover with Carl Kruger, the paddleboarder. And then we have Phil Henderson, who led the first all-black expedition up Everest. And we have a lot of very cool people. So I am a little less involved with that. My partner and other producer on the film, Ian Moreland, is sort of taking lead along with Erica and Kat, but it's fantastic.
Love it. Love what you guys are doing with that. And Karen is the reason why you and I are here talking today.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. How do people find out more about the Race to Alaska or find out about your work?
I mean, we have a company website called Blimp. It's blimp.works. You can find other work our company does. There's the Race to Alaska, the actual website, or their Instagram. There's Northwest Maritime Center. Yeah, it's just theracetoalaska.com. That's the film's website. But yeah, if you just Google it, there's a lot of ways to watch the film, and r2ak.com tells you a ton about the race. And the bios are really fun. Like, they write these very comical bios of all the teams, so that's always a fun thing to look into. And I don't know, it's a great community.
We'll make sure to include links on our show notes. Zach, this is such an amazing story. Like, you bringing together all these passions, you taking part in this multi-year journey to put this documentary together. At some point, Hollywood's going to find out about your story, and they're going to want to make a movie about you. And I want to know, when they do, who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you in your movie?
I really don't know, but by the time, they'll probably all be dead by the time they actually want to make a film about me. But I've always really liked Daniel Craig, so if you can
nice,
Daniel Craig to play me.
Okay, I love it. Daniel Craig, I like him too. What's your movie going to be called?
I don't know. I think something to do with wind and water, maybe, or something.
Wind and water.
I don't know yet. So
I love it. Well, hey, something with wind and water. It sounds really good to me. Zach, this was so much fun. I loved the movie. I'm so thankful we had a chance to talk today. I really appreciate you spending the time with me. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Zach's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Zach, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much.